Good afternoon and welcome to the first session of our 2025 webinar collaboration series. My name is Presley Baker Strother and I'm a staff member with the California Commission on Disability Access, the CCDA. On behalf of the CCDA and the Pacific ADA Center, we would like to thank you for joining us today for the Business Owners and Operators Guide to Accessible Parking webinar. This webinar is being recorded. Our first Lunch and Learn session in our webinar collaboration series will highlight CCDA's Accessible Parking Guide for business owners and operators. You can access the downloadable PDF guide in the QA box or by visiting the website link that we will be providing. This toolkit promotes awareness, summarizes key requirements, and offers resources to help avoid complaints related to accessible parking and accessible routes. Today's webinar is an educational opportunity for business owners and operators to learn more about accessible parking compliance. We also have ASL interpretation and closed captioning available. A big thank you to our interpreters and captioner for being here today. Before we jump into the content, let me go over a few housekeeping tips. For our housekeeping, please keep your audio muted during the webinar, and then please use the Q&A feature to post your questions. The chat feature can be distracting for people with vision disabilities who use screen readers. For Zoom viewing options, in the upper right-hand corner, select View for speaker or gallery view, and with Screen Share, there's standard and side-by-side options. During the PowerPoint, the view options at the top of the screen to adjust zoom ratio and other features can help with how your screen is. During the PowerPoint, you can use the slider between the shared screen and participants and then slide your screen to the preference of viewing. We will have the Zoom live captions. To turn on captions, select the CC icon shown on the captions menu bar. You can change the size of the captions by selecting the up arrow next to the CC and choose the caption settings. You can move captions by hovering over captions and dragging them to the preferred locations. To turn off captions, you can select the CC icon. On the left of the screen, we have a screenshot of where the show captions box is on the screen, and you have the options of the speaking language, the view full transcript, or the caption settings. And below that, there's a screenshot of the closed caption font size where you could change the font size to what you would like. We will be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. To ask a question, you can select the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. A box shown to the left will pop up. You can input your questions throughout the webinar. The box on the left says, "Welcome to the Q&A." It's a screenshot of what the Q&A Zoom box looks like. On the bottom, there's the Zoom bar, and there's a circle around the Q&A button for when you want to post a question. During our Q&A session, it will be at the end, and selected questions will be answered. Now since we have covered housekeeping, we have a great webinar planned. Here's a quick overview of the topics we'll be covering from the Business Owners and Operators Guide to Accessible Parking webinar. We'll start with introductions from our presenters. We have the California Commission on Disability Access Executive Director, Dawson Rawlings, and the Pacific ADA Center Deputy Director of ADA Programs, Garrett, as our presenters. For our agenda item 2, we will talk about how to use the toolkit, and we'll talk about why this matters to you and your customers as a business owner, and also some responsibility and legal liabilities. For agenda item 3, we're going to cover what a certified access specialist is, also known as a CASP, and we'll review the Disability Access and Education Revolving Fund, also known as the DARE Fund. For agenda item 4, we'll go over parking accessibility evaluation questions. And under this agenda item, we'll also cover facility maintenance, and we'll talk about the burial removal tax credit programs. For our 5th agenda item, we'll go over understanding accessible routes along with curb ramps. Our 6th agenda item will be going over accessible parking spaces. We'll go over the amounts that different parking spaces you may need depending on how big the lot is. And then our last agenda item will be the question and answer. And we've received the Zoom registration questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible within the time we have. We will also address questions submitted in the QA box throughout the webinar during this time. Once again, please remember to place your questions in the Q&A box during the webinar. Thank you again for being here today, and I'll pass it over to CCDA's Executive Director, Dawson Rawlings, to review the webinar's learning objectives and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Presley. Welcome, everyone. I'm April Dawson Rawlings, the Executive Director of the California Commission on Disability Access. I want to talk about some of the key learning objectives you can expect today. The participants, by the end of this webinar, you should be expected to understand the importance of accessible parking for people with disabilities and how it impacts business operations and customer experience. Number two is you should be able to understand the role of the California Commission on Disability Access and the Pacific ADA Center and the role that we play in promoting accessibility compliance. Number three, learn essential accessibility terminology and how they apply to accessible parking, and identify the role and value of a certified access specialist or CASP. I also want to make a quick note that if any of you need a certificate for continuing education credits, we will let you know how to get in contact with us at the end of the webinar. We can provide you with a certificate of completion. Our webinar today provides an agenda, the learning objectives I just went over, as well as a survey, which we understand meets the standards for many organizations that provide continuing education credits, but it's up to the organization you work with to decide if they accept this webinar for those credits. So we'll provide you with that certificate. Just send us an email and we'll do that for you. We are still working on becoming a CE provider for AIA. That has not happened yet as of today, but we're working on that for our next webinar. However, there are many other organizations that may offer CEUs for today's webinar. And next slide, please. I'm pleased to talk a little bit about the organization that I have the pleasure of leading, the California Commission on Disability Access. We're a 17-member commission that was created by the state legislature in 2009 as a space to convene, brave conversations around disability access related to businesses and to bring together stakeholders from all levels of government, people with disabilities, and the business community. We provide things like small business education and outreach. We provide technical materials and training, such as the toolkit that you're about to learn about. And we also conduct regional listening forums and webinars, such as this one. And we track disability access litigation data for the state legislature. And we provide that data in an annual report to the state legislature. And with that, I am going to pass it on to my colleague, Jan, to talk about what her organization does.
Thank you, April. So welcome, everybody. Really glad that you're here with us today. So the Pacific ADA Center offers technical assistance in the form of email and phone, and you will actually talk to a live person or be emailed by a live person as opposed to an AI chatbot. And so we can hopefully answer your questions. What we provide is really informal guidance and not legal advice on the ADA. We also do trainings. Obviously, this is one example of them. We do lots of Zoom trainings now. Occasionally, we do in-person training as well. We have webinars. Again, this is an example of webinars, and we do quarterly webinars on the ADA and civil rights, and also webinars on ADA and healthcare. So we hope that you might sign up on our website for some of those free webinars that we offer. We also have materials that we generally provide through links in emails to send people. There's lots of different materials about the ADA and other disability rights laws throughout the internet that we can help you find. And then we also provide conferences, and typically we do at least a virtual conference every year. And so again, if you sign up for our email information, then you'll know when we're about to offer another conference. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. So let's talk a little bit about how to use this toolkit. And by the way, you can find copies of the toolkit on our website, and we have it in multiple formats as well. And obviously, we're not going to be able to cover everything there is to know about accessible parking in under an hour, but we'll give you the highlights of the toolkit today, and then we are going to leave lots of time for questions that many of you submitted. We also have in the Q&A a link to the guide. So this toolkit's intended to avoid complaints involving accessible parking and accessible routes. It's not intended as a checklist or a substitute for the California Building Code or what you would receive in a certified access specialist evaluation. But it is a really great overview that you could take to the job site with you, or talked with a CASP about, or people that you may be working with, such as people in the construction industry. So this is really a tool for business owners and operators to feel empowered, to learn a little bit more than they did about accessible parking and how to find the resources to ensure that you're compliant. Jan?
Yeah. So why should this matter to you? As a business, or even if you're a state or local government, you still have customers, but certainly you do as a business have customers that come to you. So it should matter to you because it's the law, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, but it's also the right thing to do. It makes your business more accessible for everybody, and draws in more customers, gives you more sales, and in order to bring in more customers. And if those customers like the access that they get, they tell their friends and family, and you get more customers overall. And then obviously compliance does matter. The ADA and the California Building Code have set specific standards, and it does matter that you comply with those specific standards, because they really have set those standards for a reason, and that's to provide the greatest level of accessibility.
Thank you, Jan. This is April. So let's talk a little bit about some terms and definitions. So let's talk about, what does accessibility mean? Well, it means the coordination of various elements within a building, facility, site, or area that ensures access and full usability for individuals with disabilities, and that it meets California Building Code compliance standards. And on the screen, there is a picture of a ramp leading up to a building that says deliveries, and there is a detectable warning, a yellow detectable warning in the middle of that ramp, and it has a really low slope. Next slide, please. Thank you. The second definition, let's talk a little bit about what an access aisle is. That's a striped space next to accessible parking. Many of you have probably seen those in parking lots, that in typical businesses where you have those. It's like a white aisle kind of in between parking spaces. It provides room for wheelchairs to get in and out, wheelchair users to get in and out of their vehicles, and it must stay clear of obstructions. And so on the screen, you see on the left, there is a person getting out of an accessible van, saying hi to the person in a walker getting out of their sedan. And there's an access aisle in between those two parking spots. And so it just shows how they have enough space to get in and out. And there's no shopping carts there, or debris there, or potted plants there, anything that could obstruct. Also, no one parking there who's not supposed to be there. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk a little bit about accessible routes, and that's covered a lot in the accessible parking guide. So an accessible route can be defined as a clear, continuous path for wheelchair users and others with disabilities. It connects accessible spaces and elements, and it includes features like parking aisles, curb ramps, crosswalks, ramps, and lifts. And so you could see it on the screen here. I'll make a description. There is a person who is in a store, and it looks like he's a Hispanic man sitting in a power scooter, and he is shopping for, it looks like, detergent at a department store, and he's using an accessible route. So this store owner obviously thought about all the spaces and elements that this customer would have needed to use to be able to be a shopper just like everyone else. And so because it's an accessible route, this person's able to shop for his detergent. Next slide, please. And now what we have on the screen here is a picture of the international symbol of accessibility. It's a white wheelchair figure on a blue background, and it indicates accessible spaces designed for people with disabilities and represents accessibility in buildings and facilities. Jan?
Yeah, and so you're often going to see this international symbol of accessibility. You'll see it on parking signs. You'll see it on the accessible grocery checkout. aisle, it will tell you that this is kind of the accessible way in, or it should tell you that when you see this symbol, that this is the accessible entrance, this is the accessible checkout aisle, this is accessible parking. Next slide. So businesses have to provide access for people with disabilities under the ADA, and specifically under Title III of the ADA. Buildings that were built after 1993 need to follow the ADA standards, which are now the 2010 ADA standards for new construction. A lot of people think that if they have a building that was built, say, in 1987, that their building is grandfathered. It is not. There is no such thing as grandfathering under the ADA or under the California Building Code. It is a myth. What you need to do for any buildings that were built before the ADA came into play, for businesses, that is, for private facilities that are open to the public or public accommodations, you need to provide what's called readily achievable barrier removal. Readily achievable generally translates to cheap and easy, something that is affordable for this type of business and size of business, and that is possible to do within the structure of the business. And you have to remove the accessibility barriers that exist all the way from the points where you arrive at the site, whether that's parking or the sidewalk, through the entrance and throughout your business. You have to remove those barriers. It's important to know that the owner of the building and a commercial tenant, let's say a business is renting from an owner that owns a larger building, both the owner and the tenant are responsible for accessibility because they are both within the definition of a public accommodation. And if there's a lease in California, the state law requires that leases have to state if a certified access specialist or a CASP has actually reviewed the site and done a report. And so that lease has to tell you that. And if you're a tenant, you have the right, or a prospective tenant at a commercial space, you have a right to see that CASP report and to know whether or not you actually want to lease a space in this building. Okay. And so, is this you, April?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry about that.
that's
So
okay.
let's talk a little bit about what a certified access specialist is. And if you go to our website, we can help you get in touch with how to look up where a certified access specialist may be in your area for if you're a business owner looking to hire a CASP. So a CASP, or certified access specialist, is certified by the state of California to assess accessibility compliance. They can inspect facilities, provide reports, and issue disability access certificates. And the CASP report indicates, accessibility issues and applicable standards, and that they can, really be a partner for your business to figure out, what are some of the areas of improvement that I need to make as a business owner to be compliant with the California Building Code. And also, for the prior slide talking about readily achievable barrier removal, it could really help you to make a plan for the things that you may be able to do from year to year to put in your annual budget. So maybe this year you work on a quarter of what the CAS report says, and then the next year you work on the other quarter. So it's all about planning for access. The certified access specialist can help you plan for access on the front end instead of the back end, and really be a partner to you in that process. And we're going to be talking a little bit later in the program about how you could potentially afford a certified access specialist and what programs might be available to you. Next slide, please. So for illustrative purposes only, this slide says Disability Access Education Revolving Fund, and there's a couple of different, it's a timeline of the fund's legislative history, and that's for illustrative purposes only. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but The fund is something that CCDA and the Division of the State Architect love to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to discuss. And so the accessibility, the Disability Access Education Revolving Fund / Accessibility Compliance Fund is a fund that was set up where $4 of every business license fee goes into a fund. 90% of it is retained locally, and 10% of it goes to the Division of the State Architect to administer the Certified Access Specialist program. We have a QRG that's being posted in the chat, or excuse me, in the Q&A about all about the fund. And basically the purpose of this fund is so that municipalities can make sure that they are providing education and retention of certified access specialists for their municipality. And that is the main goal and purpose of the Accessibility Compliance Fund, that 90% that I spoke about. But the law recently changed 2 years ago to also allow, after you have worked on the training and retention of CASPs, municipalities are also able to use any leftover funds after that is accomplished to provide programs that help businesses with access remediations and access education. And so some municipalities, such as the city of San Jose, who spoke at our last CCDA meeting, have set up grant programs with the remaining fund dollars to help fund certified access specialist inspections and to fund accessibility compliance improvements that come from those CASP inspections. And so again, the Disability Access Education Revolving Fund, the DAER part refers to the 10% that goes to the Division of the State Architect for the administration of the CASP program, and then the 90% is retained locally by your municipality. So if you have questions about how the municipality in your area spends down those dollars, you could go to the Division of the State Architect website and look at the annual report that the municipalities submit to them every year about how they spend those funds. And also you could always have a relationship with your local municipality and ask them if there's any funds available for access remediations, or how they spend the majority of those funds on the training and retention of CASPs. And we can also be a resource at CCDA as well. Again, you could look at the QRG that we created that's in the Q&A as well as on our website. Jan?
Okay, so let's talk about parking accessibility evaluation questions. How do you evaluate the accessibility of your parking? And this can be found on page 4 through 5 of the guide, and there's the link to the guide that's been placed in the chat. So one of the first things you want to look at is the location and arrangement of the parking spaces. You need direct access so that you minimize travel behind other parked vehicles other than your own, because you don't know who's going to back out. They may not see you. So you want to provide the accessible parking spaces as close as possible to the entrance or entrances of the building. You also want to be specific about the size of the spaces. The size can be different, but generally you are allowed to have like a 9-foot wide van accessible space with an 8-foot wide access aisle. But you can have a wider van accessible space with a 5-foot wide access aisle. And we often will encourage that 5-foot wide or 60-inch wide access aisle, even though you're allowed to have a wider one, because if you have the wider 8-foot wide one, people will tend to park in it because it looks like a parking space to them. So we encourage people to keep with the 60-inch wide if that's at all possible. And you have to connect that access aisle to the parking space, the accessible parking space that it's serving, and it also has to connect to an accessible route. So there may be a curb ramp at the head of the access aisle, or if it's just a flat surface to get to the sidewalk, then it connects to that accessible route at the top of the access aisle. You also want to make sure that everything is firm, stable, and slip resistant on both the accessible parking spaces and the access aisles. So everything should be, in just a 2% cross slope maximum in all directions for both the space and the access aisle. And you should make sure that there's no obstructions like April was referring to earlier. There's no bollards, there's no detectable warnings that are allowed in either the space or the access aisle. You also want to make sure that you're clearly marking your space and your access aisle and that you're following the requirements for those markings that are in specifically in the California Building Code if you're in California. You want to follow that. And you also want to follow the signage requirements. So you want to make sure that the signs are visible and that they're compliant in terms of where they're located, how high they are, that they're reflective, that they contain certain language, particularly for the van accessible signs. So you want to make sure that your signage is compliant also with the California Building Code.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jan. This is April. So let's talk a little bit about facility maintenance. I alluded to this earlier, the importance of thinking about access as just a core part of how you do business. It's just like, you pay attention to health and safety to make sure that you don't have, critters in your restaurant. You make sure that you budget for your menu items. I'm using just a restaurant as an example because there's a picture of a group of restaurants in this slide. And so, some of the things to think about for facility maintenance and putting access on the front end instead of thinking of it as an afterthought is that you can contact a certified access specialist before any maintenance is done just to ensure accessibility compliance. They could be a partner with you to decide what maintenance should be done so that you don't make assumptions, and can also help work with you to figure out what are some of the estimated costs, and to talk with you about how to make a plan for accessibility and making those improvements. It's important to have a plan for maintaining accessible features. So accessible features is pretty much anything that a person with a disability would need to access in order to fully enjoy what your facility offers. So for example, if you sell taffy in Bodega Bay, you have to make sure that your taffy jar is accessible for people in wheelchairs, and that you have an accessible route to all the things that you need inside and around that anybody with a disability would be able to access. And so thinking about parking and budgeting for costs, it's important to document the work that you do. One of the myths that CCDA tries to dispel is many business owners come to us and say, well, if I even think about accessibility, if I even voice it, or if I even hire a cast, it'll put me as a target for a lawsuit. When in fact, what we know is that the opposite is true. It actually protects you. There's actually protections for business owners if they are a target of a lawsuit, to be able, if they can demonstrate that they hired a CASP, and they can also demonstrate that they did work on a readily achievable barrier removal and documented those efforts. And think about it in your budget. Make sure that accessibility is a part of your budget. And you also want to train your employees on disability etiquette, including service animals and accessibility standards. Because as Jan spoke about earlier, people with disabilities, we talk to each other, and we're just like everyone else. And so, if we have a really great experience at your facility or your business, we will tell our friends to come. If we want to go for a drink after work and we see that low bar and that friendly person, then we will remember that, and we will tell people to come to your business. And it's important to remember that several $1 billion a year are spent by people with disabilities at businesses. So we are customers just like everyone else. All right. And so this is a picture of a bagel shack kind of before this person is trying to get into the bagel shack, but there's a step. And then at the bottom it says after, and there's a ramp, so it's easier to get into the bagel shack. You can find more information about barrier removal tax credit programs on our website under the Business Connect page. For example, there are CalCap ADA loans to help small businesses fund ADA retrofits. There's also up to $10,000 for small businesses and up to $15,000 for all business tax credits that cover barrier removal and disability related accommodations. Also, again, research whether or not your municipality utilizes accessibility compliance funds or other funds to stand up programs. Such as the program that the city of San Jose stood up, which would allow you to hire a CASP and to remove accessibility barriers. And many other municipalities also may offer those as well through either the accessibility compliance program or others. And so there's help out there to be able to afford a CASP, as well as it's to incentivize you to be able to help your business achieve access compliance. Jan?
Okay, thank you, April. This is Jan speaking. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's really also important about accessibility and getting into the business is understanding the accessible routes. So accessible routes are paths that connect all the accessible areas inside and outside a building. So what I talked about earlier, from when you park and you have the access aisle, and that access aisle needs to connect to the accessible route, maybe through a curb ramp, and maybe through a blended transition, which is flush sidewalk, with where the parking space and access aisle are. But you need to have an accessible route to get to the building entrances, all the entrances, and you need to disperse your parking in case you have entrances at different points and you have parking at different points in a building or facility. You need to have accessible parking that lead to all possible accessible entrances. And so you look both at the parking, if you have it. You also look to the sidewalks and other side arrival points that you may have, and how do you get the accessible route from that sidewalk all the way to the accessible entrance. Okay, so that's part of also what you look at in addition to any parking you may have. And again, you may need to use ramps or curb ramps and lifts in order to get people to your accessible entrance. And you want to make sure that you have safe slopes. So remember, a ramp slope would be a maximum of 8.33% or 1 in 12. And all cross slopes should be a maximum of 2.08% or basically 1 in 48. And you want to have firm, stable, and slip-resistant surfaces to the extent that you can, particularly inside, but also outside to the extent that you can. And also minimum changes in level. So you should have the change in level like at a threshold, for example, or maybe where the sidewalk is upheaved, should be a maximum change of 1/4 inch. It can be up to 1/2 inch, but that's if the first part of the rise is 1/4 inch, and then the last part of that 1/2 inch is beveled, so it's kind of cut so that it's at a 1 and 2 angle. So you don't want to have any changes in level that are over 1/2 inch, and when it's over 1/4 inch, it has to be a beveled change in level. Okay. And we've got a picture of somebody going into a store here that's going from the sidewalk. There's like an ice machine outside, and the person looks like they have a service animal as well. And so they're opening the door to try to go in. And so they're going to have to let their service animal be able to get around them to go in the entrance. Okay, and that's showing the clear space around the door. Oops, okay. And then also, one thing that you might encounter along the accessible route are curb ramps. So they could be parallel or perpendicular curb ramps. This picture is actually showing a parallel curb ramps because it's two slopes that come down to a landing at the bottom, and then the landing has detectable warnings or those yellow bumps that are there before you actually enter the crosswalk. So the curb ramps allow access for wheelchair users and other mobility device users from the parking or from the sidewalk to crosswalks and other walkways. In California, they need to be at least 4 feet wide with a mild, up to again a 1 in 12 slope. If it has flares on the perpendicular curb ramp, those can be at 1 in 10 slope. And the landing of the curb ramp in California needs to be 48 inches for a specific perpendicular curb ramp. And then the non-compliant curb ramps, if they're not workable, they can really pose a safety hazard and a legal liability because people with mobility devices may not then be able to get up from the street to the sidewalk safely, and so that can cause a big problem for businesses that are trying to use curb ramps in their area. Okay.
Thank you, Jan. This is April. This is a accessible parking spaces chart that talks about the total number of parking spaces relative to how many spaces that you have in your at your facility. So, for example, if you have if you provide 1 to 25 parking spaces, at least one has to be an accessible parking space. And so the number of accessible parking spaces depends on the total number of parking lot spaces, as I mentioned. 1 out of every 6 have to be van accessible, and it's important to comply with the CBC or the California Building Code for proper accessibility. So this is an example of a chart that you can refer to in our accessible parking guide for business owners and operators.
Okay, so electric vehicle charging stations. This is something else that is applicable in California. Electric vehicle charging station spaces are not parking spaces. That's the first thing you need to know about electric vehicle charging stations. They are there for charging your electric vehicle. Now, there are different descriptions of vehicle spaces in the California Building Code that talk about like a standard accessible space and a van accessible space for these EV charging vehicle spaces, but those are not to be confused with parking spaces. They have separate accessibility requirements. And you can actually share an access aisle with an accessible parking space and an EV charging station. So that's something that is allowed in the California Building Code. So you can have your parking space and then your access aisle and then an EV charging space that shares that access aisle with the parking space. And you should definitely look at the California Building Code carefully for the requirements for electric vehicle charging stations. Not only is there a requirement for the vehicle spaces and how wide they have to be, and you also would want to paint them a different color than the parking spaces to distinguish them from the parking. But you also need to make sure that the parts on those electric vehicle charging stations are operable for somebody with a disability to use. So they shouldn't require more than 5 pounds of force. They should be at the reach range. They should have a clear floor space where those operable parts are. So these are all in the California Building Code requirements and are important to consult that for compliance with electric vehicle charging stations. And it's showing an EV symbol on the left that looks like almost a gas pump, but with an electrical cord.
I would like to thank Jan and April for this informative presentation, and I want to move on to our next agenda item, which is the question and answer session. So we've received questions from the Zoom registration, and we have received a Q&A question as well. So if you do have any questions while we're doing the Q&A, this is your opportunity to ask the presenters about the ADA parking compliance. Please type your questions in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to address as many as possible. So for the first question, I wanted to begin with, what is the business owner's responsibility regarding policing on the accessible parking spots and access aisles?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michelle Davis, and Jan and April have invited me in today. I'm a supervising architect with Access Compliance at the Division of the State Architect. And I'm happy to help answer any technical questions that Jan and April can't answer today. So enforcement is one of those questions that is actually multifaceted, and business owners should check with their attorney as well, because it does have a legal component to it. But tow-away signs should be filled in, and those are the signs you see usually at the entrance to a parking space, and they'll warn people that unauthorized vehicles that are not displaying a special license plate or placard shouldn't park in the accessible spots, and that you risk being towed if you do park there. Now, in order for law enforcement to actually tow vehicles on private property, the owner does need to have an agreement, and you should contact your local police or sheriff's office to make sure you have an agreement in place, or the owner has to contract with their own towing company. And so that's where you would want to check with your attorney on your responsibilities there.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Would either of you like to add on to that question, or did she do a great job at answering it? Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Yeah, she did do a great job. Just to reiterate that in general, when you're looking at the California Building Code and the ADA, you're not looking at parking enforcement. You're looking at the requirements for the signage and for the markings and the width of the spaces and the connection to the accessible route. But it's not really going to tell you a lot about how you might enforce those accessibility requirements. And Michelle did an excellent job of explaining how you might want to do that as a business owner.
Well, thank you so much. This is Presley. I will move on to the next question. We actually received a Q&A question, so I'm going to read off of that. What if a business has limited parking near the doors and extended parking in the back? The handicap parking is in the back. Is it not a violation for the shortest accessible route to the business?
So yes, if you put all of the handicap parking in the back, that would absolutely be a violation. You definitely need to put accessible parking on the shortest route to the accessible entrance. If the extended parking area in the back is so large that you end up with accessible parking both in front and in the back, somehow you're going to have to provide an accessible route from that rear parking to your accessible entrance. You're still providing some accessible spaces on the shortest route. It just may not be all of them. And that's really where a CASP and your local building official can help you determine what you actually can do depending on your specific property.
Thank you so much for your response. April or Jan, floor is open to you. Or was that a great answer?
You can move.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. All right, moving on to the next question. What would be required to make an unimproved dirt lot used only for an overflow parking accessible?
So I'm going to let April try to tackle this one since she mentioned the pumpkin patch and other kinds of temporary events where they often will just have a dirt lot. So what happens when they have the dirt lot for the temporary event?
This is April. I will answer this and then see if Michelle wants to say anything technical about it. But it's, this comes up a lot because I know in Sacramento where I live, there's a lot of festivals and concerts and also like lavender days and things that happen on dirt lots. And so it's just important to, remember accessibility. There's lots of things that you can do. Obviously, make sure that you have an accessible parking, designated area. Make sure that that there's, clear routes and paths of travel to get from the dirt lot to the event itself. You might want to consider offering a shuttle. Make sure that shuttle has lift-equipped vans, and also, if you're running a special event, make sure that you have a contact person on the website or under the registration link so that people can understand who they can talk to if they have access questions to navigate, this special event. And also if it's raining, people with disabilities, that dirt road will then become a muddy road, and it might be impossible for people to navigate that, and it won't be an accessible parking lot anymore. Michelle, did you have anything technical that you wanted to add to that? I just think it's important to make sure that people remember to keep in mind accessibility when they're trying to create an accessible space out of a nebulous environment or an informal environment.
Sure. Thank you, April. I think it's important to note that if the dirt lot is only for overflow parking and that there's a regular improved parking lot somewhere, then it's probably really important to make sure there's enough accessible spaces in that regular parking lot. And that may even mean that you turn some of the standard parking spaces into accessible spaces for that event, by blocking off and not allowing parking in between, so that there's every other space is parking. And that way there's an access aisle between those spaces, even though during regular operations, they may not be accessible spaces.
Yeah, great answer. I would say the dirt lot, particularly when used for overflow, should be not used for accessible spaces if you can avoid that. The improved regular paved lot would be much better to use for accessibility spaces.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your answers. And that will conclude the question and answer. I will move it over to our executive director, Dawson Rawlings, to go over some resources.
Great, thank you, Presley. So the CCDA Business Connect page at www.dgs.ca.gov/CCDA, and then there's several tabs such as the resources page and the Business Connect page. We have information such as ADA quick tips about some of the tax incentives we talked about today. You can also learn about the link to the Certified Access Specialist program and what a Certified Access Specialist inspection entails, as well as how to locate a CASP in your area if you would like to hire a CASP. You can also obtain a primer for small businesses, as well as a link to the California State License Board, who's also been a partner with us for our construction toolkit. Next slide, please. And then, there's also information on our website about electric vehicle accessibility requirements. There's a great YouTube video on our website that talks about that. Also, go to the Guide to Accessible Parking. And then there's also a great library where we link to the California Office of Emergency Services site. So there's a lot of information. Obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, you're not able to we're not able to cover everything about accessible parking, but hopefully this gives you a sense of some of the highlights. And if we weren't able to answer your question today, we will share in a moment how you can get a hold of us, send us an email or call us or send us a letter to find out more. Next slide, please. Jan, would you like to talk about how to stay connected with you?
Yes, please. Thank you, April. So this is Jan speaking. So as I mentioned earlier, you can contact the Pacific ADA Center to sign up for our newsletter and our listserv at the link on the left, www.adapacific.org/subscribe. And we encourage you to do that. We try not to inundate people with emails, but we do give you access to our monthly newsletter and events that are coming up, including our webinars, many of which are free. We also have our address on there at P.O. Box 665, Concord, California, 94522, where you can send us a letter. And you can also contact us for technical assistance if you want to, or other questions at our 800 number, 1-800-949-4232, and that's for voice or the relay service. Then you can email us at info, I-N-F-O, at adapacific.org. If you have questions that we can help with or you need technical assistance, you also can explore our website, which we think is really good. It's in plain language. It's easy to navigate. And you can do that at https://adapacific.org. April?
Thank you, Jan. This is April. So to stay connected with the California Commission on Disability Access, again, you can go to our website, which again is www.dgs.ca.gov/CCDA. You could email us at ccda@dgs.ca.gov, or you could send us a letter at 400 R Street, Suite 310, Sacramento, California, 95811. We also have a phone number, 916-319-9974. And this is a picture of what I'm reading on the slide. And so you'll be able to have access to that if you forget. You could also sign up for our newsletter on our website and our e-blasts. All of our webinars are free. And so we're going to have more webinars this year with Jan and her crew. We also, I would like to also let you know that we also have listening forums that you can attend in your area. Our last listening forum took place in Burlingame last month, and we're going to have listening forums this summer taking place in Sacramento. We also have a commission to community segment at each of our commission meetings where we talk about featuring a municipality and their community partners and some of their best practices for providing access to businesses in those municipalities. So it's really important for us at CCDA that we lift up those voices and be a resource for our stakeholders, whether it be a local government or people with disabilities or local businesses. And so if you're a business owner or a person with a disability or a municipality that has questions and needs to get connected, give us a call, email us, write us a letter, or stop by and we will help you get connected with those resources. I also want to mention, as I mentioned previously, that there is an evaluation available for this webinar. So on this page, there's a QR code as well as a web code. There's also the link in the Q&A. If you need assistance accessing the evaluation, just let us know. And that will allow us to know how to improve for future webinars. Also, you can, once again, if you are looking for continuing education credits, you may be eligible for continuing education credits by attending this webinar. That's up to each continuing education credit authority that issues those credits. And so you can email us and ask us for a certificate of completion, and we will provide that to you for some, so that you can submit that to the authority that you're seeking the credits from. Thank you. Well,
So
And
are we wrapping up?
I
today?
think we're wrapping up. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank Jan and the Pacific ADA Center. I want to thank our interpreters as well as our captioners. I want to thank Michelle Davis from the Division of the State Architect for helping us answer those technical questions. If we didn't get to your question, send us an email and we will write you back with an answer. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. And all of the materials today will be sent out to everyone who registered for the webinar. Thank you so much. And Jan, would you like to say any other words?
No, just thank you always for collaborating with the Pacific ADA Center. We're always happy to collaborate with the California Commission on Disability Access. You all do great work. This parking toolkit is just one example. And definitely thank you to Michelle Davis for help on the technical questions. I always learn things from both April and Michelle. So this is always a great collaboration. So thank you so much to everybody who attended today, and we hope that you'll be in touch. And please do fill out the evaluation. We'd love to have your feedback.
Thank you, Jan. And I forgot to mention that CCDA is a public commission, and so you can attend any of our quarterly meetings as well as our subcommittee meetings. It's a great way to get involved in what we do and to use your voice to inform future programming as well. And you can learn about on our website the schedule for our meetings. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.